Hey, 7th grade, Miss Huddleston here. Hello from my home in my Batman onesie. I hope you all are having an amazing Friday. I wanted to make sure that you fully understood what's going on in the classwork since we're starting a new book, and I want to make sure that you are on top of what we're doing so that, especially as we have all this testing, you know sort of what's happening. You understand the characters' motivations, all that good stuff. So, we're going to be going through the classwork together. It's going to be great. We're going to have an awesome time. And, I'm going all out. I even busted out the ring light for you all, so don't say I never did anything special for you. So, we are going to jump right into it with the classwork from yesterday. Looks like this. It says perspective and point of view. If you do not have a copy because you weren't here yesterday or you lost it, go to the sub. It is in the sub folder. There you go. If you do not have a book, like if you were one of the two people who were not here yesterday, the extra two books are in the orange box behind where Michael sits. So go ahead and grab yourself a book and make sure you check it out in the book checkout link in Google Classroom. So we're gonna, and if you don't have your physical book, the PDF is also in Google Classroom. Just keep in mind that the page numbers do not line up with the page numbers of the book. So if you're going to reference the PDF, pay attention to the chapter numbers. Okay? Chapter numbers. We're going to jump straight into things. We did question 1 yesterday, and we're going to jump back in with question 2. However, we're just going to review some things, starting with page 5. Now, page 5 is chapter 7, and as Peter noticed yesterday, all of the chapters, they seem to jump up in numbers pretty quickly, and they're prime numbers. All the chapters are prime numbers, and that's because our main character is really, really into prime numbers. Without further ado, we are going to reread that chapter and jump into some of these questions. If you are someone who happened to complete all of the first page, or even if you jump into the second page, you should still pay attention to what's happening because you might not have answered the questions correctly, or you might have only answered part of the question and not the full question, and I really want to make sure you have all of it. Yes, this will be graded. Let me say that again. Yes, this will be graded. So, here we go. Chapter 7. I recommend you read along in your book just so that you don't lose your place, that you can keep up with what's happening. Okay, chapter 7. This is a murder mystery novel. Siobhan said that I should write something I would want to read myself. Mostly, I read books about science and maths. I do not like proper novels. In proper novels, people say things like, I am veined with iron, with silver, and with streaks of common mud. I cannot contract into the firm fist with which those clench who do not depend on stimulus. What does this mean? I do not know. Nor does father, nor does Siobhan or Mr. Jevons. I have asked them. Siobhan has long blonde hair and wears glasses which are made of green plastic. And Mr. Jevons smells of soap and wears brown shoes that have approximately 60 tiny circular holes in each of them. But I do like mystery novels. So I am writing a murder mystery novel. In a murder mystery novel, someone has to work out who the murderer is and then catch them. It is a puzzle. If it is a good puzzle, you can sometimes work out the answer before the end of the book. Siobhan said that the book should begin with something to grab people's attention. That is why I started with the dog. It also started with the dog because it happened to me, and I find it hard to imagine things which did not happen to me. Siobhan read the first page and said that it was different. She put this word into inverted commas by making the wiggly quotation sign with her first and second fingers. Different. She said that it was usually people who were killed in murder mystery novels. I said that 2 dogs were killed in The Hound of the Baskervilles, the hound itself, and James Mortimer's spaniel. But Siobhan said they weren't the victims of the murder. Sir Charles Baskerville was. She said that this was because readers cared more about people than dogs. So if a person was killed in a book, readers would want to carry on reading. I said that I wanted to write about something real, and I knew people who had died, but I did not know any people who had been killed. Except Mr. Paulson, Edward's father from school, and that was a gliding accident, not a murder, and I didn't really know him. I also said that I cared about dogs because they were faithful and honest, and some dogs were cleverer and more interesting than some people. Steve, for example, who comes to the school on Thursdays, needs help to eat his food and could not even fetch a stick. Siobhan asked me not to say this to Steve's mother. So, with that said, we're going to look at question 2. Question 2, it says, in 2 scholarly sentences, describe Christopher's unique perspective of those around him. Use one piece of textual evidence to support your decision. Be sure to explain your evidence. Now, in your answer, let me just break this down for you. You need 2 sentences that are describing Christopher's unique perspective of those around him. That's the first thing you're doing. Make sure that, first of all, describe Christopher's perspective and how that's unique. Describe how his way of viewing the world is different from other people. That's 2 sentences. In addition, once you finish those 2 sentences, you need to include one piece of textual evidence to support those first 2 sentences. Once you've done that, explain your evidence. Okay? So if we're doing quickie math here, we have 2 scholarly sentences plus 1 piece of textual evidence plus explaining your answer. 4 sentences total. We're going to start off by taking 3 minutes on that question, and your time begins now. Go ahead and wrap up your answer. Okay, so getting back into things, we're going to look at question 3. Why does Christopher like mystery novels? Now, once again, all this info is located in chapter 7. So go ahead, there's no sentence requirement, just give me at least a sentence answering why does Christopher like mystery novels? Shouldn't take too long. We're going to go 1 minute on this one. Please answer in a complete sentence. Don't just give me a word. Say Christopher likes murder mystery novels because, then give me a reason. Alrighty. Question 4. What does Christopher's interest in murder mystery novels reveal about his perspective of the world? Cite and explain one piece of textual evidence. First of all, we're talking about his interest in murder mystery novels, so you're going to take your answer that you took from question 3. What does his interest in murder mystery novels reveal about his perspective of the world? So basically, how is his interest in these types of novels, what is that telling us about what he thinks about the world? Make sure you give your answer, plus make sure you have a piece of textual evidence and explain a piece of textual evidence. So you are citing some evidence, and then you are also explaining how that evidence connects to your answer. I'm going to give you 2 minutes on this question. Okay, sorry about that. That was extra loud. My bad. And then finally, question 5. You're basing this off of questions 3 and 4. What does his interest in murder mystery novels reveal about the way Christopher's mind works? So, question 4, that was all about what does his interest in the novels tell us about how he views the world? So now, based off of that, what does his interest tell us about how his mind works? How he processes things, how he deals with things, how he thinks about things. That is what you need to answer. I recommend you do 2 sentences for this. It could be a bit difficult to try to do in just 1 sentence. Anyway, we're going to do another 2 minutes on the timer, and away we go. Okay. We're going to jump into the back of the page. So for this, it doesn't say to reread a page, but I think it's really useful if we take a look at chapter 11 once again. So we're going to just reread chapter 11, and then we'll jump straight into the questions. So, chapter 11. Then the police arrived. I like the police. They have uniforms and numbers, and you know what they are meant to be doing. There was a policewoman and a policeman. The policewoman had a little hole in her tights on her left ankle and a red scratch in the middle of the hole. The policeman had a big orange leaf stuck to the bottom of his shoe, which was poking out from one side. The policewoman put her arms around Mrs. Shears and led her back toward the house. I lifted my head off the grass. The policeman squatted down beside me and said, "Would you like to tell me what's going on here, young man?" I sat up and said, "The dog is dead." "I got that far," he said. I said, "I think someone killed the dog." "How old are you?" he asked. I replied, "I am 15 years and 3 months and 2 days." "And what precisely were you doing in the garden?" he asked. "I was holding the dog," I replied. "And why were you holding the dog?" he asked. This was a difficult question. It was something I wanted to do. I like dogs. It made me sad to see that the dog was dead. I like policemen too, and I wanted to answer the question properly, but the policeman did not give me enough time to work out the correct answer. "Why were you holding the dog?" he asked again. "I like dogs," I said. "Did you kill the dog?" he asked. I said, "I did not kill the dog." "Is this your fork?" he asked. I said, "No." "You seem very upset about this," he said. He was asking too many questions, and he was asking them too quickly. They were stacking up in my head like loaves in the factory where Uncle Terry works. The factory is a bakery and he operates the slicing machines. And sometimes a slicer is not working fast enough, but the bread keeps coming and there's a blockage. I sometimes think of my mind as a machine, but not always as a bread slicing machine. It makes it easier to explain to other people what is going on inside it. The policeman said, "I'm going to ask you once again." I rolled back onto the lawn and pressed my forehead to the ground again and made the noise that father calls groaning. I make this noise when there is too much information coming into my head from the outside world. It is like when you are upset and you hold the radio against your ear and you tune it halfway between two stations so that all you get is white noise, and then you turn the volume right up so that this is all you hear, and then you know you are safe because you cannot hear anything else. The policeman took hold of my arm and lifted me onto my feet. I didn't like him touching me like this. And this is when I hit him. So with that, we have question 1. Once again, we're on the back. Analyze and explain how Christopher's encounter with the policeman is unique. Cite one piece of textual evidence and explain what that evidence shows us. So essentially what this question is asking is it's asking you to think about how do you think someone would typically interact with a police officer in a situation like this. Now that you've pictured that, compare that to how Christopher responded. Keep in mind also his age. So Christopher is 15, so imagine someone who's just a little bit older than you all. Imagine how someone who's a little bit older than you might respond to or, interacts with a police officer in a pretty average setting. And then how is that different to how Christopher was reacting? So first, answer this question. What is it about his interaction that is unique? Once you've done that, cite one piece of textual evidence that connects to this answer, and then you are also going to explain what that evidence is showing us. So at a minimum, you should have 3 sentences total for question 1. Minimum 3 sentences for question 1. 1 to answer the question, 1 for citing evidence, 1 for explaining the evidence. I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes on that one. Alrighty. Going into question 2. How does Christopher's perspective of the policeman influence his actions and, in turn, his relationship with or treatment by the policeman? So, first of all, we're looking at his perspective of the policeman. So, you're looking at how, like, what does Christopher think about the policeman? So, how do Christopher's opinions, views towards the policeman, how does that have an impact on the way that he acts? And then also, so first of all, answer how does his perspective influence the way that he acts? That's part 1. Part 2, how does the way that he acts then impact his relationship with the policeman? Or how do his actions impact the way that he's treated by the policeman? So make sure you're including both these pieces. First, we're talking about his perspective of the policeman and how that impacts his actions. And then, how does the answer to this impact his relationship or treatment by the policeman? I'm going to give you a minute and a half. Alrighty. Let's look at question 3. Why do science and math appeal to Christopher so much? That's it. That's the question. I'll give you a minute on that one. Okay. Let's take a look at question 4. We're almost at the end. Just gotta push through a little bit. Alright, question 4. Christopher says, I like this fact. It is something you can work out in your own mind by looking at the sky above your head at night and thinking without having to ask anyone. Page 10. What does this quote show about Christopher's perspective of the world and opinion about life in general? Explain in 3+ scholarly sentences. So, first of all, take a look at this quote. I recommend you take a look at some of the information that comes a little bit before, and a little bit after that quote just to get some context. And then from there, what does this quote show about Christopher's perspective of the world and opinion about life in general? Considering I'm asking for a minimum of 3 sentences, perhaps take one sentence to answer what does this quote show about his perspective of the world? So, how does he view the world as a whole? And then take another sentence to answer what does this quote show about Christopher's opinion about life in general? Now, the world and life, that can be kind of similar. However, the way that you can look at it is it can be like perspective of the world can be, sort of how things are happening around him. Here, hold on, I'm going to put my face back here for a second. Just because I want things to click a bit. So, how does Christopher view things happening around him? And then secondly, when we're looking about opinion about life, you can view that as what is Christopher's perspective about like his place in the world? So how he exists in the world. So one, how does Christopher see things happening around him? And then what does Christopher think about how he himself is existing within this same space? For your third sentence, you could do something along the lines of taking those two answers and putting them together to say, like, overall, Christopher's perspective is, and you can look for similarities between the two. So I recommend you look at his perspective of the world around him, his perspective of how he exists in this world, and then maybe compare and or contrast those two perspectives. You need a minimum of 3 sentences. I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I'm going to dive into my mug of grapes over here while you all are working. So, sucks to suck. Couldn't be me. Okay. Whew. We're at the end. Question 5. Follow-up question. So that means that we're referencing this question. What does his interest in murder mystery novels reveal about the way Christopher's mind works? Okay, so this is piggybacking off of this question 4. Question 4, remember we're talking about how does Christopher view the world around him? How does Christopher view himself within this world? And then question 5, we're specifically looking at his interest in murder mystery novels. What does that tell us about how his mind is working? Like, what is it that is capturing his attention? What is it that he is hyper focused on? What are the things that make sense to him? And you're answering this based off of how he responds to murder mystery novels. Explain. That's it. Let's do minute and a half, and then we'll be finished with this. Finally. Here we go. Minute and a half. Finish strong. All right. You made it. Woo! You finally did it. We got to the end. Congratulations. So, what I would like you to do, now that you've completed this entire piece of paper, shout out to you, especially shout out to me. I want you to take this paper, make sure your MLA is on this. Stop acting a fool and leaving your name off of papers. Like, put your name on it. Put it in, here's 2 things. 1, you're going to put it in the turn-in bin, where everything goes. 2, and I'm specifically speaking to a few people in the room. If you are Jimena, or Avery, or Serenity, this message is for you. If you are none of those 3 people, I still need your voices off so that these 3 people can hear. So, Jimena, Serenity, or Avery, I want the 3 of you to stay back after everyone shuffles out. I just want you to make sure that the class is not a complete and utter mess. You don't need to do serious cleaning, just like, please make sure that things aren't falling apart and that there's not blood splattered everywhere. And then please take the papers from the turn-in bin and put them in the orange bucket behind where Michael sits. Please and thank you. With that said, to everyone else, thank you for bearing with me. I hope this made sense. Please let me know if this method of doing class works for you, considering I can't be there. And yeah, turn your stuff in, have a good weekend, and yeah, that's it. Be sure to subscribe to coming to class and stuff. Bye.